There's nothing like coming on at Comic-Con for a spotlight panel and looking out over 5,000-6,000 faces to make you think, I really should have prepared something. And as I walked over here with Pam, who just introduced me, I said, so is somebody going to be interviewing me? How are we doing this? And she said, I don't know. And that was when my stomach sank. And then we got here and we said, is somebody interviewing me? And they said, well, there's only one name up there. So it looks like you've got me. For the next, whatever it is, hour and something minutes, with absolutely nothing prepared. I thought about printing out a story, I thought about doing something fun, but instead I will burble for a little bit and then we'll do questions and answers, because I think, out of interest, and this is just from curiosity, how many of you got to see Stardust the other night? How many of you got tickets for Stardust and then couldn't get in because they'd given out too many? I'm sorry. I think the nature of Comic-Con is changing. We used to live in a world where you would give out twice as many tickets as in the hope that half as many people would turn up. But everything is full and there are so many people. And my first Comic-Con was 1989. And Sandman number 9 had just come out. And, nobody knew who I was. It was really the last time that I could just wander around. And I did little signings, and you'd sign for 10 or 15 people, and then that was it. You'd wait around for another 5 minutes, and nobody would come. And it was great! I got to wander around the convention and there were 15,000 people and I thought, it's a bit big. And I got to meet people all the time. I met Charles Vess. And I said, you should draw me a Sandman sometime. And you could see that expression on his face of, I have no idea what this man is talking about. But Charlie is affable and sweet and nice, so he said, yeah, sure. And the next thing you know, I had him doing Midsummer Night's Dream, and I met Michael Zulli, who was incredibly important, and we were on a panel together. And I remember, I must have been on hundreds, thousands of panels since, but it was the very first panel I was ever on religion and comics. And somebody at the back, which would be about 5 rows in, put up their hands and said, I don't understand your comics because if there is God, why would there be the endless? And I said, isn't that like saying, if there is a God, why do you need to buy hamburgers from people? And you sort of remember these strange things. And that was the last San Diego Comic Convention I got to actually sort of have anything resembling a sane convention at. And 91 was still sort of sane-ish. 91, the highlights of my 91 convention included a very young man, who's no longer a very young man, named Rance Hosley, getting to the front of the signing line and handing me a cassette tape. Now, for those of you born in the last 15 or so years, cassette tapes were these things that we listened to music on them, they would get stuck in the thing, you would throw them out and you'd see them on the sides of roads. Find an old person and get them to explain cassette tapes. So he gave me a cassette tape and he said, it's by a friend of mine, she sings about you on one of the songs, please don't sue her. And I will investigate, but first I'm going to drink water and finish the anecdote. So, I took the cassette home, because I did not have a cassette player at San Diego. And I put it in my car, and it wasn't even the first of the cassettes that I was given at San Diego that I played. The first one was a sort of Scandinavian death metal thing. With a guy, in my memory anyway, he was accompanying himself on the harmonium. And it was all sort of, oh Lord Morpheus, come down from the sky. And it's true. And I put on the second one, and it was Tori Amos singing Tear in Your Hand. And I phoned her up. There was a phone number on the back of this, and I said, this is really good, you should go professional. That was still 91. After that, it turns into a weird blur. And the conventions would just get bigger and bigger, and I'd have to learn how to walk faster and faster. You sort of learn the convention walk, which consists of fixing your attention somewhere on the horizon and walking so fast that by the time somebody goes, isn't that him? They would now have to run to catch up. And it's that embarrassment factor of the run that saves me an awful lot of times from having to sign extra things for people who, because they go, no, I missed him, I'd have to run. What did Pam bring? Oh, yes, we're doing these t-shirts. Kat Myhouse, who's been assisting me, we've got 2 of them right now. We're trying them out. This is a very beautiful Anansi Boys t-shirt with a spider on, designed by Dagmar Matuszak. And this one is the Scary Trousers one. It looks like that. And designed by Kendra Stout. And it's, we sent it in, and Kat said, it's wonderful, should it say Neil Gaiman underneath? And I said, no, that's... So she said, what should it say? And I said, Scary Trousers. Which goes back to, does anyone not know where the Scary Trousers thing comes from? Make a noise. Okay, so, dinner with Alan Moore is always interesting. This particular dinner was in about 1990, maybe 91, and actually spawned a scene in Sandman and a scene in Neverwhere, all on its own. Alan was writing From Hell at the time, and I'd gone up to Northampton, the way that one does, and we'd gone out to some little restaurant, and we were chatting, and I was probably telling him something that I'd written, something life-affirming and happy, undoubtedly. And Alan started talking about what he was writing in From Hell. And what he was writing what he just finished writing that day, so he really wanted to tell me all about it, was the murder of Mary Kelly. And as she was dissected bit by bit. I don't remember what I was eating. I do remember I was only halfway through it. As Alan, and one of the things about Alan is he looms. He's very huge, he's very hairy, and as he gets more and more intense, he looms. So I'm sitting there, and Alan's explaining, and then, he's got the heart out, and he holds the heart out, and he's putting it, and he's the liver, we get the good liver, and I'm still hanging in there. And I get up to the line, and then he puts his hands in, and he pulls out her lungs, and he says, look, Netley, lights. And at that moment, I said, I'm just going to go and sit outside I need some air. And I got up, went outside, breathed a little air, walked back in, sat down, and Alan said, so the next thing he does is he starts arranging these bits of body all around. I said, I'm going back out there. I may be some time. And I got up to walk out, and as I walk out, I can hear behind me Alan Moore going, well, well, well. Neil Scary Trousers Gaiman, master of modern horror. And I went out and I sat on the curb, feeling faintly green. And a little mad old lady came along and tried to give me money because she thought I was homeless. And I had to explain that I wasn't. A scene that I then nicked for Neverwhere. So, oh, I should probably tell you it's booth 1033 is Cat's thing there. I've done my bit. Chunk of the money going to CBLDF, blah, 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 the usual there. So, what do we want to talk about? I don't know, what would you like to know? Do you want to know, why don't I run through a few frequently asked questions, just to get them out of the way, some of which are different to what they were the last time I was here. A few of them, like, what's happening with the Good Omens movie, is exactly the same. The answer to what's happening with the Good Omens movie continues to be, Terry Gilliam really wants to make it, Terry Gilliam has a script, nobody will give Terry Gilliam $70 million. Anybody here has $70 million that you don't want, don't need, found in the cracks of the sofa, or Terry Gilliam, Good Omens, he's just waiting. Will there be people have been asking if we're going to do a Sandman 20th anniversary thing. Yes and no at this point. It doesn't look like I'm going to get to write anything new, which is rather a pity because I was hoping to, but Craig Russell, and I don't even know if this has officially been announced or if I'm allowed to say this, but who's going to stop me? I'm up here. Craig Russell had always wanted to do The Dream Hunters as a comic. The Japanese story that I wrote that Yoshitaka Amano did, and even back when I wrote it, I forget why, but one night I rang Craig up, we were working on something else together, and I read him the whole of Dream Hunters over the phone. He said, can I do it as a comic? And I said, no. But that was 10 years ago. And about 3 or 4 months ago, I got a phone call from Craig, who's been working on this amazing adaptation of Coraline into a graphic novel, which is quite beautiful, and you know, everything's there, because that's the magic of Craig Russell. And if he leaves out some words, he does it in the picture, but everything is there. And really gorgeous. So Craig asked me, he said, you know, Dream Hunters, I've always wanted to do it as a comic. I've always wanted to draw that story. He said, you said no years ago, because Amano had done it as art and you didn't feel that it was right and so on and so forth, but that was 10 years ago. How would you feel if I did it now? And I thought for a second, I thought I'd really like to see it. And I'd like to read it. And he said, well, and I said, well, I'll call Karen. So I phoned Karen Berger and said, would you like to do Dream Hunters if Craig adapted it and drew it? And she said, oh my God, yes. Have they announced that yet? Did anyone mention it? No? Oh, cool. So Craig is doing that, and that should be beautiful. As for will there ever be any more Sandman stuff, I certainly hope so. We couldn't work anything out this time round, but that doesn't mean it won't happen again. And currently working very, very hard to try and get the last 2 volumes of Absolute Sandman to be as cool as the first 2 volumes. And you've only ever seen the first 1 volume, but the second volume is even cooler. And it's the thing where you go and you have to find the original pencils for a story, and then you go and find the cool stuff that nobody's reprinted. It's enormously fun. I'm very proud of it. And of course you could kill somebody if you dropped it on them, which is useful. For the right person. why don't you guys start lining up for questions? And no, Miracle Man just gets more complicated. Every time I think that the can of worms that is Miracle Man legally is just about to get sorted out, I discover that inside the can of worms is another can. And when you open it, an amazing number of new worms crawl out. And we're still trying to sort it out. Let's see, currently Todd is suing me for the Miracle Man statue that we brought out. There are people in the UK who've discovered that, who've done a deal with Mick Anglo and apparently discovered, as far as I can tell, that all of the rights that the people who did the original round of Miracle Man, the Des skins and so forth, claimed that they had and had obtained from Mick Anglo, they hadn't, and Mick still has them, and Todd doesn't have anything, and it's all wonderfully complicated. I'm sure one day somebody will write a really fun book about Miracle Man. Meanwhile, you know, Mark Buckingham and I look at each other, and Miracle Man 25 was drawn and finished and lettered in 1993. It's 14 years old, and I want to finish the story while I still remember it. I want to finish the story while I still remember where my keys are and what I had for breakfast. It's the point where we finally get the rights and everything's sorted out. It's like, oh yes, now who was Miracle Man again? It's going to be terrible. So, but that's where things are at, which is no closer, but you never know. Death. You can't just shout out, there's people in lines. Hang on, any of you people in line, did any of you plan to ask about death? Okay, come to the front. Do you happen to have a question?
There have been lots of rumors going around about what you're going to do with death. I, of course, have all the comics, but is there anything new that's ever going to come out?
I had a wonderful conversation the other day with the secretary of Bob Burney, who is the head of Picture House Films, which is the sort of, it's taken over from Fine Line as the artsy bit of Warner's. They did Pan's Labyrinth and things like that, and which is a wonderful movie. And I got to phone, and the assistant, and I said, it's Neil Gaiman here, and I'd like to speak to Bob Burney, and she said, what is it about? And I said, death. And there was a long pause. And then you could hear the icicles dripping off as she said, what? And I said, I'm ringing to talk to him about death. And you could hear her moving to put down the phone. I'm going, no, it's a movie, it's a film, it's a thing, he's buying it, honest. She said, okay, hang on. And she went and found him for me. Things are happening with death, but things are happening slowly. The thing that I have learned about Hollywood in the, 15 years now that I've been mucking about in Hollywood, is that nothing ever happens the way you expect it to. And nothing that you think is going to happen ever happens, or not in the way you expect it to. And that things that you don't think will happen always happen in the way you unexpected them to. This is what I've learned. I found a blog entry recently, dating back to 2002, where somebody said, what movies are likely to happen? And I started listing them. I said, well, obviously the first thing that's going to happen will be Books of Magic and Neverwhere. They're really high up. And then I talk about some other things, and then I say, but you know, there are even, I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but I can point to some projects that are completely dead, like Beowulf and Interworld, which was bought by DreamWorks Animation about a month ago. You don't. All I know is that I'm absolutely rubbish at knowing what's going to happen. I really am. So what's happening with, I can tell you what's happening with Death as far as I know. I wrote a script for Death. Originally it was going to be for Warner Brothers, because technically Warner Brothers owns the Sandman characters because they have the rights to that. So we were going to do Death through them. Worked with a very nice executive there called Kevin McCormack, handed it in. The guys at Warner Brothers looked at it, and I got this phone call saying, this thing that you've written, it's like a $15 million movie. And I said, well, yes. Very proud of myself for having sort of come in on the budget that we've been talking about. And they said, well, Warner Brothers doesn't really make films that small, and we don't really know what to do with it. And I said, okay, what are we going to do? And they said, well, we're not sure. So then there was a while where we were trying to figure out what to do with it, and somebody came up with the idea of taking it over to New Line. So we took it over to New Line, who went, great, Death, yes. Maybe it should have like more running around and shouting and blowing things up, because it would be more sort of New Line if we did that. So I went, okay, so put in a draft with a little more running around, shouting and exploding. And then they budgeted that, and it came in at like 28 million, because time had passed, and now there was running around and shouting and blowing things up. And they said, well, we're really not sure. We may do it, we may not. Oh, yes, no. So we went, good, okay, that's not a problem. And we went to talk to Warner Independent Pictures, who said, we really like it, except we don't like any of this running around, shouting and blowing things up. Because we like the sort of the more graphic novel-y approach, where people wander around and talk. And I said, we have a draft like that. So we pulled that out. And around that point, Guillermo del Toro, who is the project's executive producer. Guillermo is one of the coolest and most generous and sweetest people in the world. Yes, absolutely. He's also off in Budapest right now directing Hellboy. Otherwise, Hellboy 2. Otherwise, he would be here just for fun. And Guillermo, at about that point, we were talking about casting, we were talking about stuff, and he said, Neil, you know, you must come out with me. I will be filming Hellboy. You can just come out. Follow me. You listen to every conversation I have. When I talk to actors, talk to me about lenses, about setups, anything. You can talk to all my people. You get in the way. And I thought, you know, nobody ever makes an offer like that. Not in real life. Not in a $90 million movie. Not if it's a director of one of your favorite films, which Pan's Labyrinth is. And I said, okay. So I went out there and spent a wonderful 2 weeks getting in the way and following Guillermo everywhere and being encouraged by Guillermo to follow him everywhere. And as a writer, I mean, I've been on film sets many, many times, but the one conversation you're never allowed to listen to is the one where the director says, excuse me, and goes off to talk to the actors. That's the secret one. Except that now, Guillermo, you know, sort of started by saying, oh, this is Neil, he'll be listening. So I got to follow him over when he talked to the actors, you know. Don't do that. Do that faster. Why do you do that? And I really learned. I learned an incredible amount. I directed a film a few years ago called a short film about John Bolton. But this was really sort of really getting into the nuts and bolts of every shot, and it was marvelous. And I left Budapest a couple of weeks later, and I turned to Guillermo. I said, you know, Guillermo, I have so much confidence now. I feel like Dumbo, and you are my magic feather. And Guillermo said, Neil, I'm huge, I'm enormous, I'm your magic Dumbo. So currently we are, where are we at? Right now we have Picture House over at Warner's, who are need to get the rights back from DC, to which they've reverted from New Line, but that's the rights to death. The overall rights to Sandman are still within the Warner Brothers empire, which means that basically we're probably in for another 3 or 4 months of lawyers talking to lawyers in Warner Brothers who are getting paid for it. They're all employed by the same place. Anyway. So that is what's happening, and I get to put together long lists of possible casts and people I would like for various roles, and if you think I'm going to name one name, you are out of your mind. No, you really are. I mean, because, and you know what's silly about this? In 1991, if we'd have been having this conversation, if we'd hypothetically been in a world in which we were making a death movie in 1991, which would be really weird because the graphic novel didn't come out till 92. If we were in that world then, I probably would happily have told you, because it wouldn't have made any difference at all. Now, if I started listing off people to you, it will be on YouTube, Ain't It Cool News, every possible roundup, read by every Hollywood exec and every agent within probably about 25 minutes. Which will only get problematic at the point where we start trying to negotiate with somebody's agent. And we say, well, we don't really want them. And they say, oh, you do. Neil said so in San Diego. It's true. The hope is that we can be shooting death probably in London, and that's the biggest thing right now, is working the script to change New York to London, which is harder than you would think, I've discovered, because New York really was a character, and now I have to make London a character, and they're very different characters. But hopefully it'll be shooting early next year. That's the plan. It may not. Like I say, with movies, Beowulf was definitely dead in 2002. I don't know anything, nothing happens the way you expect. I'll probably be in Iceland in 2009 shooting death.
Why just switch to London?
Why London? A number of reasons. One of which is that Guillermo is going to be in post-production in London on Hellboy, and has said, Neil, I will just come round. I won't change anything. I'll just lean over your shoulder and say, you don't want to do that. But also because of the fact that it's things like the fact that I'm English, and we get all these cool English tax points if we shoot in London. Okay, let's go to the question behind you. The person who really was in the front and got moved out of the way. Hello. Hang on, I'm going to take off my little jacket. It's too hot under the lights.
Yep. Doesn't it feel so good?
What was that about? Hello. I hope that we can restore the semblance of decency here. A man merely has to take off his leather jacket and the entire place dissolves into anarchy.
Somebody did say you are cute.
What was your question?
A couple. Is Maddie going to have a picture on your website?
Is Maddie going to have a picture on my website?
Yes. You said that she was going to be at the premiere since she couldn't be here.
Maddie, actually, I discovered, I went up to my room between this morning's CBLDF meeting, followed by another meeting, followed by going up to my room, and she walked over to me because I was just at the computer trying to do some email, and she said, have you looked at your blog recently? And I said, why would I look at my blog? And she said, no reason. So I looked, and she'd done this whole blog entry about how she was blogging secretly. And it was, I thought it was hilarious. And she's just put up a YouTube film on my account, on the blog, on the next entry, which is her showing off the hotel room and modeling a t-shirt and being Maddie. So she's up there. You will. She's. What I'm really hoping is that she will blog the premiere. On Sunday afternoon in LA, up at the Paramount lot, is the premiere of Stardust, and there's going to be all these stars there, and there's going to be all these famous people there. And for a start, I'm crap at famous people. I don't even recognize them. And then I think, and then even when I'm blogging, when I do recognize them, or if I want to talk to them, I think, well, I can't really go and put this on the blog because it's name dropping or it's weird or whatever. So she doesn't care. She's 12. I figure if she gets to see somebody famous, she'll put it in. It'll be great.
Okay, silly or stupid, I don't know, but I'd like to know. Has you ever thought about the idea of making the Endless Storybook into an animated short?
Doing the Endless Storybook as an animated short. I would love it if somebody did that. I mean, I adore Jill's art. I think Jill is...
Yeah, because I saw Fairy Godmother, and
but
that's the first something.
You know what? It will almost... I mean, if you like the idea of something like that, go and accost them at the DC booth and tell them they should do it. We had a tremendous amount of problems with that book anyway, because they were terrified that children would get their hands on it. And even though it's a children's book, they were very scared that children would get their hands on it because the rest of the Vertigo line and Sandman is for mature readers, and DC was terrified that this would have appalling consequences of some kind unspecified. So, to be honest, the idea of them doing an animated, endless cartoon of the Endless Storybook is almost negligible because children might watch it and enjoy it. And then something terrible would happen. But you could go and ask them. Next person.
In November, you were in Conway, Arkansas, and you read us a story. It was about a girl who turned orange and was taken by aliens. And did you say it was going to be an M is for magic? Because I looked through it and I couldn't find it.
No, that wasn't going to be an M for magic. The reason that story got written, it's called Orange, by the way. And it's a story written in the form of answers to a questionnaire where you never get the questions. But you can kind of figure out mostly what's going on. That story is going to be in a collection published, I think, later this year or next year, called The Starry Rift, S-T-A-R-R-Y-R-I-F-T, edited by Jonathan Strahan, S-T-R-A-H-A-N, in case anybody wants to go and check on Amazon. And that story was actually written for him when his book got incredibly delayed, and I realized that nobody was going to read How to Talk to Girls at Parties for several years if I didn't pull How to Talk to Girls. I pulled How to Talk to Girls at Parties and wrote him Orange instead for The Starry Rift. Yes?
First of all, I read American Gods, and it's still my favorite book ever, and I was wondering if you were ever thinking about doing a movie for it?
With American Gods, roughly once every 2 or 3 months, although it's starting to happen more and more frequently now, I get a call from my agent saying, so-and-so wants to talk to you about American Gods. And it's either a producer, or a writer, or a director who read American Gods and loved it. And that's always very, very nice, and it makes me happy, and I'm thrilled. And I always wind up having the initial conversation with them. And the big problem is the initial conversation normally goes, I read American Gods, and I really love it. How would you go about turning it into a movie? And I have to confess that if I had any idea, I probably would have done it as a movie. When I wrote it, I'd been doing a bunch of screenplays. For about 4 years, I've been writing lots and lots of Neverwhere screenplays. I've done Beowulf, a couple of other things, and I was really sick of 3-act structures. I was sick of 20-page middles, 20-page beginnings, 80-page middles, 20-page endings. I was sick of the shape, I was sick of neatness, I was sick of tying things up at the end. So when I went off and wrote American Gods, it was with the kind of idea that I was going to write something messy, and it was going to be a road trip, and it was going to go all over the place, and it would have a beginning that started in an odd kind of place, and then it would have 5 different endings, and it would have short stories in the middle whenever I felt like it, because haha, it was my book and I could do that. So was very much part of what I wanted to do in American Gods, was to do that. One director who wanted to do it actually wanted to shoot it like Kill Bill and just make a 7-hour film and then cut it in half and release it in subsequent months, which I thought was a really cool but goofy idea, but he couldn't find any studio who thought that was also a cool but goofy idea, or maybe the goofy outweighed the cool. I don't know. I think sooner or later one of these directors or writers or producers will come along and they will say, I want to do American Gods and this is how and why I want to do it. And I will go, what a great idea, go for it. But it hasn't happened yet, but it may be the next one around the corner, you never know. Yes?
Strangely enough, the young man in front of me just stole my question, but I do have another.
Good. It's always wise to have a secondary question in case you get stolen.
First of all, I just wanted to say I'm an aspiring writer, and you've been a huge inspiration to me for years, so thank you. And second of all, do you think if we passed a hat around and put in like $10 each, we might be able to get the 70 million Terry Gilliam needs to make it on
Every now and then, I love that idea. The idea that everybody just sends Terry Gilliam $5.
Well,
no, seriously, the truth is, it probably wouldn't work at that point because Terry would go mad and, Terry normally fights with his studio. Can you imagine a world in which Terry Gilliam had to individually fight with all of you? To spend all of his time coming round and... I honestly don't know. I do love the idea, though, of everybody sort of making a movie by just sort of chipping in $5.
I'll have a bake sale if you want.
Go for it. We should definitely have the Good Omens bake sale.
Your past idea, it's not that bad of an idea. There's some web artists online who have quit their jobs because their fans raised enough money for them to keep doing webcomics. So
none of them earn $70 million a year.
You'd be surprised how much the online community can raise.
Or at least if there are any webcomics people earning $70 million. No, anyway. So.
Alright, so my question. You said something wonderful a while back about the idea that stories need to be told in the world with the coincidence of your The Book of Magic and J.K. Rowling's The Harry Potter story. Now that that story has been completed, how do you feel about her vision of those characters and that story?
I think mostly, it's really weird. I always feel very uncomfortable when people ask Harry Potter, Tim Hunter questions, because what I've discovered is I am uniformly misquoted. The first time I ever discovered one of those, I did an interview with a Scottish newspaper where I was completely misquoted, and all of a sudden Neil Gaiman is accusing J.K. Rowling of having, and this was like 1999, 2000, it was a long time ago. And I'm saying, well, I didn't say any of that stuff, actually, that's not true. And fired off a bunch of letters and, actually got apologies from a couple of these newspapers. And then 6 months later, the same story turned up. It was when that Mad Muggles woman was suing J.K. Rowling. People get to the end of their article saying, Neil Gaiman. It's like, no, I didn't. I never said that. I said the opposite. You sort of learn not to trust newspapers. The bit that, I don't know, it's so weird. I keep hearing, the only times it irritates me, because I love the Harry Potter thing, I think it's wonderful. Every now and again, I wind up scratching my head at the relationship between DC Comics and Harry Potter, the Warner Brothers thing. The time it irritated me most was I'd been asking DC Comics for years and years. We had that very abstract cover of Books of Magic, the original graphic novel, and I'd been saying for many years, could we have a pictorial cover that makes it look more like what it is, and maybe Tim and his owl, and he could be on his skateboard or flying, or just some magic thing. And John Bolton went off, and it took me like 6 years. It took me 2 or 3 years to get DC to agree to do a new cover, but they did, and we commissioned John Bolton, and he did it, and it went on Books of Magic. And the books were printed, and one was sent to me. And then Warner Brothers was going to bring out the first Harry Potter movie. And I was informed, quite seriously, and it happened, that that edition of Books of Magic was not allowed to come out at that time. And it actually sat for 9 months in the warehouses before it came out, because they were really worried that some journalists might get hold of it and start going, aha, Harry Potter, Tim Hunter, and it would embarrass DC, and thus it would embarrass the corporate Warner people further up. And I'm standing there going, but we came first. I mean, we're not ripping them off. With this, it's that. It always was that. It's the same thing. It always, excuse me. And it fell on deaf ears. That's the kind of thing that just leaves a really irritating. It's not like a bad taste in your mouth. It's just like a sort of early morning taste in your mouth. You go, what the hell was the point of that? But by the same token, one is continually having to explain to journalists who think they've just discovered this, that obviously she didn't steal Harry Potter from Tim Hunter, because she's really, really smart, and if she had, she would have changed it. Instead of going, no, she's smart. Very, very smart. And you're going to nick it? You file off the serial numbers. You make him long. You lose the glasses. You change the owl into a hawk. It's easy. Next question.
With the large amount of your graphic novel content, it's kind of like a reimagining with your original concept for Sandman, with 1602, and with the Eternals. And I was wondering what drew you to reimagining like that sort of idea of how you would create for your graphic novel content.
I'm trying to think if there are things I haven't read. Well, they all sort of get reimagined from a different place. 1602 was just me being given a completely blank slate by Marvel. The idea was, hey Neil, you can do whatever you want. Anything. I'm going, that's cool. And then 9/11 happened. And I'm suddenly going, okay, I can do anything, but all I know is I don't want anything in New York, nothing with skyscrapers and nothing with things that blow up. And that was, I thought, well, why don't I set this early? And I can do, and then just realizing that I could actually have the kind of fun that I had as a reader of discovering these characters in these English reprint comics in the 70s for the first time. So it seemed like a lovely way of reimagining them. With the Eternals, they'd been kind of messed up. The Eternals was like something really nice that somebody had brought over to your house, you know, like a sofa or something, 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but by this point, the cat's peed on it, it's been scratched up, and it's now sitting in a corner of the garage. And it's upside down and nobody's even sure it's a chair anymore. And that was the state that the Eternals were in by the time that Joe Quesada said to me, Neil, would you do the Eternals? Do you remember the Eternals? Do you like them? And I said, yeah, I did. And he said, well, they've been knocking around the Marvel Universe, they've got to the point where we don't know what they are, they're just a mess. Could you fix them? And I thought about it, and originally I had these plans that were just going to be very much it was a story that would have been an Eternal sort of story, except then I sat down and read all of the stuff that had been done with the Eternals since Jack had done them. And while some of it was good, most of it was completely not good. And it really was the equivalent of a cat peeing on it. It was like, no, this was really cool. And you guys said, oh God, oh dear, and you killed him, but he was a really good character. Oh no, you can't do that. Okay, how do I reset this? So for me, it was really what I was trying to do with the Eternals, was just going, Jack Kirby did not build this thing to be part of the Marvel Universe. It has been dragged into the Marvel Universe and made part of it by people making it up as they go along, and now it's a mess. What I'm going to need to do is build it into the Marvel Universe so at least it's coherent. So that really was my agenda, was trying to create something that people could read and then go, okay, I understand what the Eternals are, what they are, what they're here for, what they're doing in the Marvel Universe, and I could build a lot of plot stuff that they can come in the next few years and have a certain amount of fun with. And behind you, yes. Hello.
My question,
my question pertains more to the inspiration process of stuff. I write a little bit and usually listen to music or something else in the background that kind of helps me think of things. I was curious if there was anything you did to, like, you know, when you're stuck in writer's block hell, if there's anything you have to kind of get you out.
Yes. First of all, I'm not really a very good believer in writer's block. I think writer's block is a really fancy way of saying you're stuck. Gardeners don't get gardener's block. Cellists rarely get cellist block, and I'm fairly sure that people who sell shoes do not get shoe-selling block. But writers claim to get writer's block, and I've seen writers talk about having writer's block at length, in very long letters, and things posted on blogs, and you're going, if you have writer's block, why are you writing about this? And the truth is, there's no such thing as writer's block. Writer's block doesn't, there's no thing where nobody can write, but what you do is you get stuck on something. And especially if you're writing stories, it's really easy to get stuck on a story. You don't know what happens next, or the thing that you thought you knew what happened next isn't it. Those characters aren't quite how you thought they were when you began, and now you're at this point in the plot and it doesn't feel right. It feels tinny, or shallow, or just wrong. The main way that I try and beat that kind of writer's block is by, if I can, I have two things that I'm working on at any one time. And if I get stuck on one, I can always go over to the other. Or I'll have an introduction that I can write. In a worst case scenario, I'll have a blog entry. I can just go, there's something I can go and do, and get my mind off the thing that I'm stuck on. And then it's things like go for a walk. Think about it, put it away for a couple of days, read it from the beginning. It's amazing how often I'll be convinced that I've got myself to a point in the plot where there is no way out and I'm doomed. And I'll put it aside for a day or so, and then I'll pick it up and I'll read everything I've done, and I'll go, oh, but hang on, they're not doomed because I've got this guy that I didn't know what he was for standing here already, and this is there. And sometimes you get stuck on something, and it's just going to be waiting, which is something I would have laughed at when I started out. But it's true. There are things like Coraline. I got stuck on Coraline in about 1992, and picked it up again in 1998. And there was 6 years when I wasn't really sure what happened next, so I stopped until I did, because nobody was waiting for it. And it was my story. And 6 years later, I had sort of figured out. I kept thinking about it, and I'd chew it over, and there was just the point where I was like, well, I think this is what happens next, I'll just keep going. You keep writing, but don't believe in writer's block. I think it's an excuse. I think it's one of these magic things that's sort of like a magic get-out-of-jail-free card. Oh, I can't write that. I have writer's block. But you don't really, because it's so much easier to say, I'm stuck on that story. But being stuck actually gives you a way to fix it, and writer's block doesn't. Having said that, anything you can do to make life more comfortable for yourself when writing, I think is good. Play good music, drink cups of tea. This is good. Another thing that's really, really good if you want to be a writer is writing. and not doing something else. Writers, all human beings, but particularly writers, are really good at doing something else. You may never have thought that your herb cupboard needed to be sorted in alphabetical order. You may not be the kind of person who normally says, I think I'll clean the bath. But then suddenly you're writing and something else seems easier. Daniel Pinkwater, who was a marvelous writer, talked about how he's allowed, and this I stole it from him and I try and do wherever I can. He goes off to his writing place and is allowed to either write or not do anything at all. But he's not allowed to do something else. Can't do a crossword, can't read a book, can't do a blog entry or email or something. Can't doodle. You can do absolutely nothing, or you can write. And it's amazing how quickly the joy of sitting in a chair, not doing anything at all, pulls. And writing just gets much more fun. And all of a sudden, you're writing again. So, I hope that helps. Yes?
Hi. My name is Brian Wilson, and I'm also I'm hoping to become a writer, getting stuff published, that kind of thing. And I was really impressed by the way you said the thing about, stories needing to be told. So what I wonder is, what do you think makes a great story and a great storyteller?
I think, for me, the biggest problem that I have is I'm like a magician who, not a magician, not the Alan Moore kind, who burns things and has giant snakes appear, but the sneaky Penn and Teller kind, who have somebody behind the stage with a wire that they pull at an appropriate time. Watching magicians now, when I read fiction, it's you're sitting there, and you may admire the speed of the transformation. You may admire the skill with which something was done, but you almost never sit there going, he's going to cut that woman in half, because you've been backstage too long. And for me, what I really, really admire and care about most are those writers who can make me go, oh my God, he's going to cut that poor woman in half. The writers who make me forget that there is anybody behind the curtain, the ones who make me just go, I want to know what happens next. Beautiful writing is part of it. I love beautiful writing, but I really want to be able to wander into the story in such a way that I can't find my way out unless I keep reading to the end. And that's what's important to me in all storytelling.
Okay. And will you be trying to get Ray Bradbury's autograph too?
I have Ray's autograph on many things. It's the coolest bit about being, well, not me, but Amy, is you get to live in this world where when you go, I think it would be really cool if I stole that thing that Ray Bradbury did, where he took a bunch of his short stories and the ones that kids would like, and he did R is for rocket and S is for space, and you go, that was a really good idea, I think I'll steal it. And then you go, but Ray got really mad when that guy stole the title of Fahrenheit 451 for his movie, and slagged him off, so I better ask. And then you get to ask Ray Bradbury if he minds you calling your book M is for Magic. And he goes, oh, I don't have a copyright in the alphabet. You go, no, you don't have a copyright in numbers either. I love living in a world in which I can ask him that. And I love living in a world in which I can stand on stage and tease him about it. Next.
Hi, you've mastered screenplays and comics and novels, and it's always had the most rich imagination that I've come across in most everything else I've read. What have you read that has given you the influence to have this vivid imagination in everything you write, and what would you suggest to all the writers who are obviously asking all these questions?
There isn't a magic bullet. I wish I could, I mean, honestly, it's people like you, I wish I could say, you mean the book. You want to read the book of stories? Come to my room tonight. There will be a payment. You will never walk quite the same again. I will hang your toe around my neck, but I will give you the book, and then you will read the book, and then you will have, you sort of, it would be lovely if there were as simple as that, but there isn't. Why do I have this imagination? This is the only one I've got. I'm honestly useless at other things. You would not want me to drive your taxi. what did I read? I was a voracious reader. I was an obscenely and insanely voracious reader. I was the kind of kid who would go up to the school library and start at A. I didn't realize that, I was telling this to some interviewer the other day, I didn't realize what an odd kid I must have been until Maddie, who was my third, turned out to be, was about 7 years old, and I realized that once again, one of my kids had turned 7 and had not alphabetized their books. And I'm going, this is so weird. By the time I was 7, I got my parents to give me my own bookshelf, and I'd been, I was agonizing over whether Roger Lancelin Green was in the L's or the G's. It was, you worry about this stuff. And that was the kind of kid I was. I had a book. Wherever I was, I had a book. My parents would frisk me before weddings or bar mitzvahs or important occasions just to make sure to try and remove the book. And it wouldn't work because somewhere in the place that I was going, I would find another book and then I'd sit under a table and read the book. That was what I did. But that's who I am. 10 minutes? Good. You could have been sending me a message from somebody named Io. Next question. Let's just try and, let's go shorter, and I'll try and do shorter answers and try and at least get the people standing there. Yes?
All right, I'm a huge fan of all your words. This might be too in line with what you just said. I was just going to say if there was a particular story or author or character that just reached inside of you and kind of claimed you and made you think, I want to do this, this is what, this is going to be my job.
I think the first one who ever really did that to me would have been C.S. Lewis. C.S. Lewis was the first time I realized I loved the way he put things in parentheses. And I'm 6 and going, that's so cool. I wanted to do that. Len Wein and Archie Goodwin writing comics, and Will Eisner, when I discovered him, they all made me go, I want to do that. Len and Bernie's Swamp Thing was the first time that I really read a comic and I went, this is art. And I was 12, 13 years old, and it was like, this is as good as anything I've ever read. Alan Moore. Running into Alan's stuff when I was about 23 on Victoria Station and taking it home with me and going, he's writing comics and it's as good as anything I ever imagined comics could be. And I really do want to do this. I thought I didn't, but oh my God, I do. And there's lots of other ones out there. Gene Wolfe, Jonathan Carroll, Diana Wynne Jones, Ursula Le Guin, Samuel R. Delaney. Roger Zelazny was Roger's a wonderful writer for reading and feeling like you can watch him having fun. And you go, that would be so cool. I could do that too. I love it when people come up to me and say, I love reading your stuff because it makes it feel like it must be fun to be a writer. And I think, you poor fool. But I love it that, I've sucked them into my web of deceit. Next.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say thank you for the Stardust screening last night. It was spectacular, and I pledged to buy at least 2 of my own real movie tickets once it comes out. And my question is, what makes a story that you have in mind lend itself to being either a comic or a graphic novel? Like, what are the challenges between those two?
You sort of, I'm not sure what the difference between a comic and a graphic novel is, honestly.
Between, like Sandman as opposed to Stardust, or...
To be honest, I would have been perfectly happy to do Stardust as a comic. The way that when I first pitched the idea to Charles Vess, I was planning it to be a comic. Charlie was the one who turned around to me and said, Neil, I've been thinking. And basically what he said was that he hated he said the problem with comics is you always have to do the next panel. He said, wouldn't it be nice to do something that was illustrated where he just had to do paintings, he didn't have to do the next panel? And I said, sure. And of course, having done his 175 full-color paintings, Charlie was sort of grumbling. Actually, he hadn't realized that you have to do the next painting. So it was really just as bad. But 5 shirts. 5 shirts. Mention shirt. Okay, yes. I will mention the shirts at the end. Yes. Hello, you're next.
I wanted to ask you, you spoke about on your blog about a book that you were working on called The Graveyard Book. How's it going, man?
Finished chapter 5 of 8. It's really good.
When do we get to read it? When do we get to read it?
Well, I haven't finished it yet. It's got a hand it into my publisher date at the end of the year. I think it'll be finished before that, then I have to type it. The biggest problem with the Graveyard Book is it's right now it's a book. It's a big leather book with handwriting in, and 5 chapters all written.
I'm totally sucked in.
The story is all about a kid. It's a baby, a toddler at the beginning of the book, but each story is 2 years apart. His family has been murdered just before the first page begins by a man with a knife walking through his house. This is a children's book, of course.
Yeah.
But who's coming after the toddler who has gotten out of the house into the misty streets, wandered off, and goes into a graveyard where he is taken in by the dead people and adopted. And they look after him and they're keeping him safe and they're teaching him all the things that dead people know. And so the first story is that's what happens in the first chapter, and the second chapter is all about him and this little friend of a little live kid who comes to the graveyard and how they go down into the deepest of the graves. And the third is what happens when he runs away with some ghouls and how Miss Lupescu, his teacher, comes and saves him. And the fourth has already been published. That's in M is for Magic. That's The Witch's Headstone. And the fifth is called Dance Macabre, about the night that the dead and the living dance together, and with Death on her high horse. Has a death who's not quite the Sandman Death, but she's a lady too.
What happened to the next, M is for Magic? Somebody started to do it again, and there was one book. Sorry, speaking bad.
Gonna have to wrap up. We have Pam down there. Let's do one last question and then we are out of here, because otherwise we are doomed. I'm sorry to the people. Yes, I know, it's no good. You're up against her. Yes?
I just wanted to say I absolutely love Stardust and Coraline. I read them both. They're great books. I was going to ask, when you're thinking about your characters, when you're writing your books, do they reflect people that you know and that you've interacted with, or do you sit down and really just imagine the world with them?
Well, hang on. I will never. Mostly you imagine them, and even if you steal real people, they change the moment they hit the page. Mr. Wednesday in American Gods began. I was thinking, what kind of person? And I remembered a very peculiar afternoon I'd spent when I was introduced to Rip Torn in North Carolina. And I was introduced as a journalist. And they said, Neil, this is Rip. This is Neil Gaiman. He's a journalist. He writes science fiction, things like that. And this huge smile with no friendliness in it at all. He said, science fiction, yes. I was in Beastmaster, you know. And just that little interaction, I thought, that's everything I need to write Mr. Wednesday. That's the voice, that's the rhythm. And there's nothing else about the character that's like Rip Torn, except that was what I stole.
Thank you.
Okay, so thank you, all of you, for putting up with me not being prepared. Thank you all so much.